There is exactly one AAA video game that I've been looking forward to all freaking year, and that of course is the Callisto Protocol. Everything about it just seemed really promising to me. Like, you got the director of the original Dead Space, and he's quitting Activision after working on a bunch of Call of Duty games, and he's just like, man, I miss making some really cool horror games. Let's make a new studio, make some good-ass AAA survival horror. Every time I'd see a trailer for this game, it just really looked like that next logical step in the whole AAA survival horror genre that I just can't get enough of. You see it borrowing mechanics from Evil Within, you've got the stealth going on, you've got kinesis from Dead Space. Like, it felt like this game was going to take a look around the room and see what everybody else is doing and go, hey, why don't we see how else we can push this whole thing forward, you know? I don't pay full price for AAA video games very often anymore. I mean, they cost $100 frickin'. It's ridiculous. I always wait for a price drop or time to pass, but this is something that I was really excited about, so I had to bite the bullet and I had to play this day one. Yeah, see? Day one edition, buddy. I hate these banners. I made the grave mistake of checking Twitter and seeing what people thought about the game before I walked to the store to buy it, and it seemed like a lot of people were really let down by this game. I was seeing a lot of mixed kind of reactions. I looked at like the Metascore, and it got, you know, the typical 9s and 10s here and there that these AAA games always get, but scrolling down further, you're seeing 7s and 6s, and you kind of read into it, and it seems like there's not really a whole lot here. So I was really just thinking, okay, I'm gonna play for this for myself and see really what I think about it. Because, you know, I love survival horror games, I love video games as an art form, I love kind of looking at a bunch of mechanisms, because a game is just a series of rules, right? And I like kind of looking at all these rules and mechanics and seeing what works and what doesn't. So I was really interested, like, what kind of letdown is this going to be, if anything? Because I remember the Evil Within also got kind of a similar lukewarm reaction, and I ended up loving that game and seeing a lot of stuff in it that other people didn't. So I beat the game last night, and I have to unfortunately say it's not that same case with Evil Within. It's genuinely disappointing. I did find this game incredibly disappointing in a lot of ways, but at the same time, I didn't like hate it. I didn't seem to think this was as bad as a lot of other people do, and I think it's just because I like to give credit where it is due. I like to see the strengths in something, and there are a handful of really good strengths in this game. It's just that overall, ultimately, I think it fails as a package because it doesn't really bring those things together. So let's get into why. I figured I'd do more of like an unscripted thing for this because I'm working on a really big thing right now. I didn't have the time to kind of do a real Callisto video, but let's just put some scrambled thoughts together. So I guess we'll start with some of the obvious positives. The production value here is bananas. Like, when you first start the intro and the actors are just these human-ass characters with the nice full facial scan, like every kind of wrinkle, or when the guy kind of has an expression, a subtle expression, it really reads through. And I feel like that is one of the only values that photorealism has, is the ability to completely preserve a nuanced human performance. I remember when Metal Gear 5 first did that with the face cap and Kiefer, and I felt like it made certain scenes a little bit more, there's that subtle human connection that you just kind of like, oh wow, you feel what they're feeling when you can do that. So that's a strength that I think this game does really well. I think the performances are quite good. They got like actor-ass actors for it, and the chemistry is good. They feel like, it doesn't just feel like video game-ass dialogue, you know, like they interrupt each other, they butt heads, there's a lot of emotion in the dialogue, and there's this sense of camaraderie throughout the game that I really, really liked. Like, I remember when we got to the first guy in the prison, he's like, oh, I'm gonna help you out, bruv, I'm gonna help you out, and I was like, how can I trust this guy? And then he gives us a weapon. I thought, okay, there it is. If the guy's giving us a weapon, there's got to be some degree of trust there, because he's giving us the ability to hurt him now. So it's like, okay, I think I trust you a little bit more.
Your name's Elias, by the way. Jacob. Don't lose it, Jacob. I might just save your life.
And there's this other character you kind of butt heads with the whole game, because you are transporting the cargo that kind of caused this whole thing, and you didn't know that, and she thought you were doing it on purpose. So like, the kind of inciting moment where it's like, okay, they separated the differences and they're really on the same page now, is when she gives you a gun.
How do I know I can trust you?
I don't know if that was like a deliberate, consistent characterization that they try to have in there, but I did notice it, and I thought it was like a cool little detail. Of course, the production value extends into the incredible environments. The detail in these environments is just bananas. You can really just look through and just see all the pipes and all of the medical supplies in certain rooms, and it really is amazing to kind of just take it all in walking through these areas. It really feels like there was a lot of passion put into really trying to create a very detailed world on this this moon of Jupiter, Callisto, this big prison complex. It's really quite neat. I mean, not to give it too much credit, graphics aren't everything, and that is just kind of what AAA games are supposed to do. But I will argue, you know, like, I sometimes feel like I buy a AAA game and it doesn't really feel like it has that AAA detail. This game at least does get that much right, and it very much does feel like a big Michael Bay-ass producer coming off of Call of Duty making a polished freaking product. It did feel really polished too. Like, I didn't experience a single hiccup or a single glitch or anything throughout the entire game. It ran at a perfectly good solid 60 FPS on PS5. I can't speak for the last gen versions, and I hear the PC version has a lot of issues, but I'm strictly talking about the PS5 version. I had an incredibly smooth experience from the start to the very end. The game crashed on me one time, but I was also playing the vanilla, completely unupdated version on launch day. I wrote down a bunch of pros and cons, actually. Incredible lighting engine, even in performance mode. Yeah, the lighting engine is nuts, even when you're not playing with the ray tracing on. Like, it's 30 FPS with ray tracing on PS5, but I disabled it. I didn't even see that much of a difference. The lighting engine is just that freaking good. So, like, nice, smooth graphics on this beast of a AAA game. The Dead Space deaths. Yeah, they do have those big, not so violent, gruesome deaths that you would expect from Dead Space, and you know, this game is directly influenced by Dead Space. Some of them are pretty freaking gruesome and entertaining to watch, so that much I would also give it a point for. Gyro controls. I didn't expect that. PS5 games are starting to get gyro controls more often now, which is weird because you would only really see that on Nintendo consoles. But I'm really happy because, like, ever since I played Breath of the Wild and I realized that just, like, using your wrists to kind of help your aim in conjunction with the stick, that's like god tier aiming right there. I honestly even prefer that over mouse movement. And Callisto has that with the PS5 controller, and it's not like Resident Evil 8 had a weird, like, fake motion controls where it was like, it felt like a stick and it was completely unusable. This is just actual gyro. It feels like you're playing Breath of the Wild to kind of aim, but they don't let you really turn with it. You kind of can only aim in like a little dead zone box, so it's reeled back a little bit, and it made the action like really fun to engage with because of how snappy you can get out a weapon after you like hit a guy and stuff. I guess if we're talking about more about the strengths, let's get into the combat, because I do think the combat does have a lot of strengths. The combat is probably the single most criticized thing I see about this game. It seems very divisive. A lot of people hate it and think there's nothing to it and find it very frustrating to engage with. A lot of people are kind of defending it, saying it's a little bit more nuanced than some people are giving it credit for. Well, I do like the combat. I feel it's really weighty. Every hit you hit with a guy, when you knock him right back and the camera gets right in close, again, it is that strong production value of just visuals and camera movement and sound and lighting and effects that just makes every punch, boom! It feels like you're a motherfucking survivor. It feels great. You got the R2 swing, which is your regular, do a bunch of combos, match that one swing, and then you have the R1 swing, which is like a slower, heavy hit. So you kind of have two little options there, kind of like a FromSoft game. Your strong hit for knocking them back, and then your lighter hit just for kind of doing away the damage. And there is a really fun conversation between that melee and the shooting that it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does happen, it's really freaking fun. Kind of this ballet between knocking guys back, popping off one shot on one dude, picking something up and throwing it at another guy with the Dead Space kinesis mechanic. Like, that sometimes is incredibly fun and satisfying, especially when you get out of it without taking any damage. There's also that dodge mechanic where, like, if a guy's about to swing at you, if you're holding left or right on the stick and you're not like doing another action like attacking, you'll just dodge it. And I got really mixed thoughts on the dodge because, like, in these big moments where you're fighting like 3 or 4 guys at once, it's kind of hard to pull back and make sure you're not doing an attack and dodge when you kind of have to keep looking around for where they're coming from. So now the back and forth becomes this thing about isolating enemies. You don't want more than one guy close enough to hit you at once, so you're taking turns pushing each one back and letting one guy get close, dodge that, hit him back. It becomes this really challenging and exciting back and forth. It feels like a survival horror gameplay conversation, the kind of thing I seek in these games. But where it begins to fall apart, I think, is there's a lot of things here. There's like a sore lack of variety in the amount of actions that you can do within these gameplay scenarios. And there's also like, the dodge is way too easy. So like when you got more guys going on, like I just said, it can be a little rough to get that dodge to work. But if you're just one-on-one with an enemy, and this happens a lot, as long as you're just holding left on the stick, and you just make sure like to hit him twice and then wait, just kind of do it a little slower so you know you're not going to hit while he hits, you will always dodge. Every single time without fail. It becomes trivial when there's one precise answer to every single that version of this encounter. While I feel like in a lot of other survival horror games, it was widely dependent on what you had. Because it's like, oh, I can't just keep knifing the guy in RE2 Remake because my knife's gonna run out of health. I can't just like punch him to death because that's a good way to get killed. But when you make the melee kind of like this one solid answer to a lot of types of encounters, you lose that like variety, you lose that expression, you lose that decision making, you lose that consideration for the resources you have. Resource stuff in general was kind of not so great in this game. I always felt like I had way too many bullets, but it's because like this melee is so OP in these types of scenarios. You're just by default, just by doing what's obvious to do, you're just going to save so much ammo without that feeling like a challenging thing to achieve, without that feeling like a rewarding thing to achieve. And there's also like a big lack of decision making in just like the weapon variety, right? Where like, let's say something like Evil Within, you got a sniper rifle for far guys, shotgun, a guy comes close, you got the pistol for mid-range, and you got like the sniper, the crossbow bolts for the more strategic shit, and you're bouncing between those four things as you're running, you're climbing up ladders in the action sequences in this game, in Evil Within. But in Callisto, you really don't have very many weapons, and they all kind of feel the same. Like, Dead Space had the craziest weapons. You had like the Ripper, you had the line gun, you had the little bombs you would drop and they would trip the wires and blow up, and it felt like there's a balance between strategy, you got like decision making regarding like how close they are to you, how many there are around you, what types of enemies they are. There's a lot of different things to consider. Where here, it feels like, okay, you got the normal pistol, the stronger pistol, and just the tactical pistol, which is another just pistol, and then you have the shotgun, and you have the assault rifle, and you're really just kind of bouncing between those, and they all just kind of feel the same, and none of them really feel contextual to any situation other than, yeah, shotgun knocks them back a little more, so use that, that's the gooder one, and the rest are just kind of like all just the same pistol. I don't know, it just felt like most of the exchanges ended up feeling the same. Even if like the back and forth between that satisfying combat and the gunplay sometimes was fun, at the end of the day it still wasn't doing nearly enough to be as fun as like every other AAA survival horror game in this style that I've played. And it's especially disappointing because Dead Space had that variety, and this game claims to be directly influenced by it, but I can only help but to wonder, like, is Glenn Schofield kind of got like the Michael Bay producer kind of perspective, where he's thinking more about the aesthetics and the environments and the big bombastic moments that make you feel things? I mean, you know, the game calling it Start a New Experience instead of Start a New Game kind of makes me think he's thinking about it that way, instead of thinking about the how broad can we make the mechanics here, so playing through this can just feel like a lot of different things that's just really fun to go through. You know what I mean? Maybe working on Call of Duty for so long rotted his brain. I don't know, but either that or like maybe he was just kind of not that mechanically minded to begin with. I mean, don't forget that it's not just one guy making the game, it's always a whole team of people, and who's to say that many of the designers on Dead Space, separate from Glenn, kind of came up with all of this variety and all these different ways to do things. Let's talk about the grip mechanics. So you remember Kinesis in Dead Space, this mechanic where you like telepathically pick shit up and you would look and you would launch it. And you could do a lot of things with that thing. You could rip a arm, a sharp blade off of a necromorph zombie and launch it at another one. You could pick up an explosive barrel and throw it at a group of them and try to like time it so you get the most of them with it. You could interact with the environment in a lot of ways. You could pick up a battery cell and put it into this power generator to open a door. Sometimes there's these giant mechanisms, these big metal panels and cargo things on like these rail tracks, and you have to grab them and you move the whole thing over, and you're like kind of,
I don't know if you really want to call it puzzle solving, but you are interacting with the environment in a lot of different ways with this one mechanic. And then in Callisto Protocol, they give you the same thing and you can only do 2 things with it. You do get to use it in combat, but like, you can't rip things off of guys and throw them at another thing. You can pick guys up and throw them, but throwing them at each other doesn't really seem to ever do anything. The only thing you can do with picking a guy up is throwing them into spinning blades. Throwing them into something that'll kill them. So it's like, if there's an environment thing, it's always just a wall of spikes or a spinning blade. It's always the same thing. Pick them up, throw them to that. Do that, always works, till you run out, do the other options. It's just like a natural priority just to like, okay, I'll hardest guys, boom, boom, boom. There's no strategy there because I just did the one obvious thing to do. And sometimes you can pick up those explosive barrels and throw them, and you know, that much is fun too.
And I guess you can also pick up like these little guys and they blow up things as well,
but that's it. If you're going to push the envelope forward by making a new super game inspired by this old thing, why are you doing less things with the same idea instead of thinking of even more? But the biggest thing that kills it for me in Callisto Protocol is that there's no ways to interact with the environment at all. All of those big puzzles and stuff, and well, not to say that every game needs puzzles per se, but I just wish that if they want this to feel like a AAA, super detailed, amazing, like, this is a real breathing world, let me interact with it. Dead Space's space station felt real because I was able to take this kinesis thing and move stuff with it. There's a door slamming shut, open. I got to like make it stop time with the stasis. There's nothing like stasis in this game either, but that was another thing to let you influence the world in a way that made it feel real, you know? And it's especially disappointing because like the explanation why the grip is a thing is it's a thing that prison guards have to like pick up prisoners and stop them and like kind of in your cell, and that's why they have it. So if every single prison guard, everybody who works at this prison has a glove, why not revolve everything around these gloves? Why don't they use the gloves to move these super iron bars that you couldn't move with your regular hands? Why don't they use the gloves to open every like whoosh, industrial door? Why am I not using this glove that you would think they would design this whole prison around? Why am I using it for nothing but picking a guy up and throwing him at a thing? Until I run out of picking up ammo and then I just go back to my guns. And let's talk about the stealth now. So the stealth mechanic is literally identical to Evil Within. You got the circle button to crouch. While you're crouching, if you get behind a guy when nobody sees you yet, press the X button, instant kill with a knife. It is literally the exact same thing, and that's great. It was a really fun mechanic because in Evil Within, it was something that you had to like kind of riskfully or skillfully pull off, and then you got an instant reward, right? So let's say start of the encounter, there's like a village and they're all walking around looking for you, so you're sneaking and it's like, okay, one guy, that's 2 sniper bullets saved, okay, another guy, okay, that's a shotgun bullet saved, okay, and can I get this last guy? Oh, that guy's gonna see me, but okay, a third guy, and now I got like a bunch of ammunition saved, then I'm like, okay, nice, I didn't have to worry about spending resources on those 3, now I got a little bit more for the rest, instant reward, you know what I'm saying? There's a back and forth, there's a reason you want to do that, that is rewarding. In Callisto, there's like no encounters where you get to do that. The grand majority of the enemy encounters in Callisto, they just appear and they all know where you are and they all come at you and you just gotta kill them all. It's just instant aggro, hive mind, they all know where you are. There's never like a stealthy intro to a situation that then goes awry, and then you get to be like, okay, cool, I saved 3 bullets at least, boom, 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 let's see how well I can do from here on. You never ever get that. You get that maybe like twice. And I think they realized that towards the end of the game, because in like the 3rd or 2nd last chapter, there's a part where it's like, hey, guess what, guys? All of the enemies in this room, they're blind, and they can't hear the stabbing animation, even though they hear your footsteps. So just walk up behind every single one, every single one, every single one, and you just kill them all, and it's easy as shit, and there's no point. There's no point in this. And that's where I think Callisto ultimately fails, is that it does have a lot of isolated mechanics that are really fun. The weighted combat, the stealth, it like functions well, but they fail to tie it together through like the design. And then they also kind of don't have enough variety there, you know, again with the lack of weapons and yada yada yada. Oh, speaking of design, the level design, the arena design. So, you know, like in a lot of Resident Evil games and like in Evil Within and even Dead Space,
there's times where you're put into this forced encounter where everybody knows where you are, and it's more of like one big action sequence. It's not every encounter like it is in Callisto, but they give this to you every now and then.
So it's like, okay, action sequence, I got all these resources, let's freaking go, buddy. And that's great. I remember Resident Evil 8 really went back to a lot of the verticality that Resident Evil 4 had a little bit. God, I'm so excited for the frickin' 4 remake. It's just, I love verticality and like the jungle gym nonsense. Evil Within 1 has a lot of areas like that. You're hopping through houses and you're going up and down ladders. I said this on Twitter. I think this is a kind of a funny way of putting it. If those games are like a fun and visceral, exciting game of snakes and ladders going up and down, jumping around, then Callisto Protocol's just ring around the rosy. Like every arena where you really just have to fight a bunch of guys, oh, excuse me, sorry. Every arena where you just have to fight a bunch of guys, it's just a flat area, no ladders, no jumps, no verticality. There's rarely a thing you can hop through. Like the final boss has that, but I can't really think of any other situations. I can think of one other one that has like a thing to leap through, but mostly it's just flat areas with a couple of objects. And certain areas you just run around them and just keep shotgunning them, and his AI kind of just doesn't really know how to keep up with it. Not to say that like a silly AI exploit like this doesn't exist in those other games, but you're a lot less likely to want to rely on that because you have all these other options that you can do. Where in Callisto it's like just that simple back and forth between melee and shooting, and that's it. I just wish they had more. Dodge is questionable. Dodge isn't as nuanced as I hope. Yeah, okay, so I talked about the dodge. It is too easy when it's just a one-on-one thing. See, what I thought the dodge was going to be is I thought you're going to hold like a shoulder button to plant your feet and then use the stick to have control over your dodge. And then you would have to like time it. But the game says right away in the tutorial, you don't need to time the dodge. As long as you're already holding the stick when they attack you, you just get it. I wish the dodge didn't just give it to you. So far, every single item is in a locker or a body, making you less likely to want to look around these very detailed environments. Yeah, another reason I felt the environments didn't feel all that engaging, even if they were hyper detailed and really fun to look at, is that like there's not really that many items hidden around the environment in ways that, like, you know, in a Resident Evil game or Evil Within, you could like open a drawer and find it in there, or like break a crate that you have to find behind a tree. And in this game, it's like always look for the identical treasure chest or the identical wall box thing, or just stomping it out of an enemy, just like Dead Space. It just feels like it's just doing the exact same thing as Dead Space. And sure, Dead Space did that too, but you didn't notice it because the game was doing so many other interesting things. So it just really sticks out as kind of like a dated video gamey thing. Like I remember like, everyone shits on this game, but you gotta admit, like in Last of Us 2, it was fucking badass when you break the glass on a vending machine, and then you reach in and get it. And then you break the glass on a totally different thing.
And you do break glass on shelves and stuff here too, but there's something a bit more meaningful about it when it's like a variety of actually recognizable objects instead of just like, oh, the same boring gray sci-fi shelf again. And sure, maybe you don't even agree that this is a thing that matters. Maybe you think it's like, oh, God forbid a video game feel like a video game. But it's just because the environments are so ridiculously detailed. They put so much effort, I mean so much effort, into creating a hyper-detailed world that they wanted to feel like this experience. So then why would you put just this video game-ass stuff on top of your hyper-realistic stuff instead of trying to tie that together somehow? Again, that's what Callisto Protocol's problem is that even if in a vacuum all of these isolated aspects of the game are of very high quality, they just fail to tie them all together.
So yeah, it's just kind of a bummer to have all of these incredibly detailed, super graphics environments, but not really a lot about them that kind of makes you feel like you're really, I don't know, there with it. It kind of feels like a bunch of hallways just with window dressing. Pro, it prompts you for the quick shot even if they're dead. Okay, that's actually something I really like. So there's this cool mechanic where if you get a couple of good hits on somebody, it'll prompt you to do a quick shot where you can basically press like the aim button and the shoot button really fast, and it'll just like lock right on and get a quick shot off, and that'll like blow off their arm or do like a bunch of damage, might even finish them off. But the thing about it, sometimes if that swing kills them, it'll still prompt you. Meaning, like half the time you get that prompt, you could just waste a bullet. So now there's that moment of hesitation of, should I take the quick shot? You count out how many swings, you get a feel for which enemies have what health, and now there's this bit of deliberacy to it. So like, giving you the quick shot, even though you kill him. I don't know if that was deliberate or not, but that was the sort of thing that added to the moment-to-moment decision-making that I felt like at large the game was kind of lacking in a lot of ways. So at least there's one cool thing it does do.
Also, remember how freaking iconic Isaac Clarke's character design was? What the hell ever happened to that? You couldn't hire like a really cool artist to design your character because like look at this, I'll prove this right now, right? See that? Who is that? I just drew bullshit, but you know that's fucking Mario, right? Okay, look at this. I drew bullshit, but you know that's Sonic, right? Okay, bullshit. Isaac Clarke. You can tell because there are defined, simple features that you can remember. I couldn't draw Jacob. I couldn't draw his suit. I couldn't draw his helmet. Jacob just looks like a Black Ops 4 character with like an alien space helmet. Speaking of Alien, the story does dive into like evil space corporations trying to control stuff that they don't understand. Also very similar to Alien, and I'm kind of a sucker for that. So like some of the plot stuff was actually pretty fun. That's another thing I will give it credit for.
That's pretty much all the pros and cons I wrote down. I'm sure there's a lot more I could talk about, but that basically I think wraps up my thoughts about Callisto Protocol. Again, I wouldn't even say it's a bad game at all. It's just that, like, when it looks so promising and it's being this huge super graphics, next-gen AAA, $100 super game, you kind of think it would try to learn mechanically from games that came 12 years before, 10 years before, 5 years before. Like, if you fail to learn from your contemporaries, you're just kind of doomed to make a game that isn't really as interesting as those games, because it's like you have no idea how much a game can do until you play something else that's doing all of that. So, I don't know, it just feels like a watered-down Dead Space that kind of fails to tie its new mechanics together in a meaningful way, and just kind of ends up being this really linear, really pretty game with good performances that, yeah, I guess it did hold my attention to the very end, but I think more so because I was just desperately hoping in the next chapter, maybe this time, it would give me something new and interesting, and it kind of just didn't the whole game. If you're interested in it and you think it looks fun and fine, and maybe you haven't played all these games that people are comparing it to, I wouldn't say like don't play through it, but certainly don't pay $100 for it. I think this game is probably going to do really, really well because, you know, AAA budget, they can afford the marketing. I'm seeing ads for this game everywhere. Even Cyberpunk, as awful as the launch was, it did numbers, man.
So I can see this game also doing well and getting reasonably cheap sooner than later.
If it's ever cheaper, like 30 or 20 bucks or something, and you just really love these games, you want to explore that Callisto thing that people say wasn't as good, sure, get it then and go through it. You'll get a little bit of enjoyment out of it. Just do not expect it to be the next big thing that I was hoping it to be.
I guess on its own merits, not being compared to anything else, it's a totally competent game. It doesn't really execute anything poorly. I mean, like, the mechanics themselves, they work and they function, and at times they're even pretty freaking fun. But I just find it impossible to recommend a $100 game that's just okay, when you can buy games that do everything this game does better for a fraction of the price right now.
Go on Steam or the Xbox store right now, and you can get the original Dead Space for like 15 or 20 bucks. On both of those platforms, you could also get Resident Evil 4 for only 20 bucks. You could also get Evil Within 1 for 20 bucks. And you could even just get the Resident Evil 2 remake. That's not even as expensive as it used to be anymore. Like, that's half the price at this point. There's so many better options that it's just impossible to recommend right now. Honestly, if you really like horror games and you do want something new and interesting, you really can't be looking at AAA stuff right now. AAA games right now are only interested in recreating past experiences just with better graphics. If you want new and interesting shit, look at indie games. I can think of two right off the top of my head that are really cool. Signalis and Faith. If you're looking for like new kind of feeling horror, check out one of those two. So yeah, that's pretty much what I think of the Callisto Protocol. Thank you so much for watching all my unorganized thoughts. Hopefully the editing in this video wasn't like too disorganized or chaotic. But yeah, it's just really disappointing. Even if the game itself isn't terrible, it feels kind of pointless to make a brand new game
that's just like, you look around the room and it's just like, everything else already did all of this, but better. Why am I gonna play this? Because it looks pretty. I need more than that. You just need more than that. Oh, one last thought, actually. I probably should have mentioned this, but one thing I am hopeful for with, like, how promising this game kind of was, maybe they'll make a decent sequel to it, because there is already a pretty solid framework here. They just gotta, like, tie a couple of things together and then really expand on it.